Dylan lived a quiet life in Black Lake, Alaska. The town was named after a small lake there that had a high concentration of algae, and was completely surrounded by trees that cast their shadows upon the lake, unless the sun was at its zenith. These two factors caused the small lake to have a dark tint, which led to the choice of the name Black Lake. His closest neighbor was about 3 miles away, and that's how he liked it. Waking up in the morning to see the snow clinging to the thick forest of trees was his paradise. Sure, he encountered a bear here or there, maybe the occasional wolf, but the truth was that if he left the wildlife alone, then they would do the same, except for the deer. They'd come in like a swarm of bees and crap all over the place. He tried using repellent and would make loud ruckuses to scare them away, but nothing worked. That's why he got his 2 boys. There were 2 Canadian Eskimo dogs called Bruce and Port. He'd raised them from puppies, and they were loyal dogs and, honestly, Dylan's best friends. They were territorial and did a great job keeping those damn deer away. They even seemed to keep the bears and wolves away. They weren't scared easily and were as hard-headed as they were big, always ready to charge out into the trees. They were the first to clue Dylan into the fact that something was very wrong. One night, he heard a rustling coming from his trash cans outside. He whistled for Bruce and Port to chase off whatever critter was making the noise, but the dogs wouldn't listen. They both stood there at the open door, shifting anxiously and whining. For the first time in 5 years, something was scaring them. Dylan wasn't an idiot. If something was scaring Bruce and Port, he wasn't about to investigate what it could be. He shut and locked the door. He made sure he had his shotgun near him, and he didn't go to sleep. The sounds from the cans were becoming louder and louder. He only left the house when the sun was up in the sky, and the sounds had stopped hours prior. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. His metal trash cans were crushed as if something strong had wrapped its arms around them and squeezed. Trash was everywhere, torn and ripped. At first Dylan assumed it must have been a massive bear searching for scraps. It wasn't until he saw the paw prints that his bear theory went out the window. He had seen paw prints from wolves many times. They were easy to recognize. These prints, though, they were huge, easily 3 times the size of any print he had seen. That wasn't what scared him the most. It was apparent that whatever animal had made these had been walking on their hind legs. Dylan didn't know what it was, but also didn't want to find out. Whatever it was, hopefully it had searched for scraps, hadn't found any, and went on its way. That next night, Dylan realized that his hopes were for naught. Around 1 a.m. a great howling startled Dylan awake. The dogs jumped off the edge of the bed only to quickly hide underneath it. The sound was unlike any animal he had ever heard, hoarse and echoing. Even the crickets stopped chirping as if scared to disrupt the great noise. What was worse was that the sounds weren't far off. Suddenly his front door started to shake wildly. Dylan grabbed his gun, sure that something was about to burst through the door. Loud scratching sounds could be heard from the other side of the door. The creaking of the thick wood was loud, and it seemed that the door would give way at any second. And then nothing. The shaking and creaking stopped just as suddenly as it had started. The howling could be heard coming from farther and farther away until it was gone. The crickets played their song again as if nothing had happened. Dylan didn't sleep that night either. He sat in his rocking chair with his shotgun in his lap. Bruce and Port slowly left their hiding spot and lied down at his feet. He didn't open that door until it was time to let them out for the day. Their fear had seemed to disappear and they ran out into the snow. Dylan walked to the front of the door. Scratch marks. Deep scratch marks. Whatever it was that had left them could have easily broken down the door, so why didn't it? Dylan walked back inside and slumped on his chair. The scary stories that his grandmother had told his brother Eddie and him as children had been racing back into his mind ever since he had seen the paw prints. He had tried being logical. After all, he was an adult. He shouldn't be scared of wives' tales made purposely to scare children into obeying. Still, logic was failing him and his grandmother's stories were fitting too well into this equation. Never leave into the woods after dark, she would say, because the wolfman stalks through the trees looking for prey. He isn't a werewolf. There's no human in him, though some of his physical features are quite human-like. Maybe years and years ago he was a man, but no one knows for sure. What is known is that the wolfman is over 10 feet tall with coarse fur covering his body. His face, feet, legs and hands all resemble a wolf's, but he is not a wolf. Wolves are not evil. Wolves don't like to play with their food. Wolves are just animals trying to survive, but the wolfman is different. He likes the fear of his prey. He likes the pain he can inflict. He leaves a mark when he's found someone he likes, and then he will return to claim his kill. The best way to stay safe is to stay around other people. He will stay away from those that walk together. Dylan was a grown man. How could he even think this could be an option? Still, what explanation was there for what had been happening the last few nights? He pondered for hours until the sun was setting. Weird. Bruce and Port never stayed out all day. They should have been home hours ago, scratching at the door to be let in. He opened the front door and started calling out their names. It got dark quick out in the woods, and soon he could barely see a few feet ahead of himself. Dylan went to the back door to see if yelling out in the opposite direction would catch the dog's attention. He opened the back door and opened his mouth to holler when he let his mouth fall shut. There was a large figure laying still in the snow. Was the mystery creature crouched and ready to pounce? Dylan moved a shaking hand up and turned on the backlight. He screamed. Piled on the snow were the mangled and bloody bodies of Bruce and Port. He stood frozen in shock until movement farther out caught his eyes. There was a dark figure slowly walking closer to the light. He couldn't make out details, but he noticed a couple of things. 1. The figure was huge, easily 10 feet tall. 2. It had an odd gait that Dylan had never seen any creature have before. When he heard the loud guttural growl, he quickly slammed the door shut. The figure barreled at the door, causing a crack in it immediately. A couple more pushes and the door would give way. Dylan didn't even think. He grabbed his keys and ran through his house and through the front door. He made it into his truck when he heard the back door splinter open. He put the keys in the ignition and started the truck up, hitting the gas with all his might. The truck had moved about 10 feet when he heard the sound of claws scraping against the metal of the back of his truck, as if trying to grab it. He had just made it. Dylan looked in his rear-view mirror for only a second as he sped away. The sight of the creature would forever be in his nightmares. The creature was pitch black and seemed to be made of pure muscles. There was blood on his muzzle where long sharp teeth were bared into his skull. But it was the eyes, those red unforgiving eyes, that truly shook Dylan to the bone. He looked forward and never looked back. 10 years later and Dylan worked as a mechanic in a suburban town. His wife and 2 kids knew that he had once lived in Black Lake, but he refused to ever talk about his life there. His youngest son was going through a phase where he was scared of monsters. Silly Brandon, his older son Todd said. Monsters aren't real, right Dad? He said, looking up at his father. Dylan smiled and nodded. Neither noticed that the smile never reached his eyes.